what is going on in Queensland? I mean, we have somewhat of a back down from Stephen Miles today. He says he's waiting on this modelling, but that modelling isn't going to change what we already know.
That modelling is not going to change anything. And last week on Sky, we told viewers that 90% was now the rate that Queensland was looking at. And, of course, they dismissed that entirely. They said, no, that's misleading. Look, the reality, Law, is there is no Doherty Institute modelling. And even when there is Doherty Institute modelling, guess what? They extrapolate the figures for the worst-case scenario. The worst-case scenario, as we saw from that grab earlier. So the bottom line is this. In Queensland, we have a government that is setting up Fortress Queensland. Who knows when? Who knows when they will actually open the borders? It might be 2024 for all we know before the next election, because they know they have one KPI, and that is to keep Queenslanders safe. They are not going to vary from their hardline border stance. They are going to put in place policies that ensure that nobody from New South Wales or Victoria gets to Queensland unless they adhere to those absolutely ludicrous and crazy protocols that exist now. And as a result, you are going to see heartbreaking stories that are being chronicled every day in the press about the problems that exist for people getting over the border. And so, unfortunately, there is absolutely no way the government will open the borders for Christmas, and that means tourism operate. They may as well abolish the tourism department and the tourism ministry portfolio in Queensland, because there will be no tourism industry in Queensland if this hardline border stance continues.
Well, it's interesting to hear from Stephen Miles. He's not backing down. I also thought it interesting to say that calling names or name calling at this stage is not helpful, but we can go back through some history there. Gleeson, this was particularly interesting. He says the biggest problem they have is everyone from New South Wales and Victoria wanting to move to Queensland. Have a look.
The biggest problem we're coping with right now is the number of people who are moving from New South Wales to Queensland, from Victoria to Queensland, and so we'll continue to take our health advice from the Chief Health Officer, not from Bob Katter or others who want to criticise the measures we've got in place.
Look, interestingly, I find it strange that he's wearing that as a badge of honour in many ways. People have been in lockdown in New South Wales and Victoria for quite some time, but to be so desperate that they have to move to see their family, that's not a great badge of honour, is it?
And, of course, yesterday he referred to the Prime Minister as the master of distraction. I've never seen a government in Queensland with as much spin as this government. I mean, and the other thing too, Laura, is they use taxpayer money to fund research and polling, which drives their decision-making. They know, absolutely, that their re-election prospects hinge on keeping Queenslanders safe. Now, there is a school of thought throughout the world that it is impossible to keep the Delta variant out. The only way they're going to keep the Delta variant out is to maintain these draconian sort of, world first, if you like, lockdowns, which, mean that people can't actually travel to Queensland. But the balancing act here, there's a couple of things at play here, Laura. The first is the balancing act attached to the health narrative compared to the economic narrative. And the economic narrative in Queensland is that there are many, many businesses going to the wall because they cannot deal with other businesses throughout the country and throughout the world. The other thing that I think is really overshadowing the way in which the Queensland government is approaching this particular crisis is the exemptions unit. Now, the Premier, she defended the exemptions unit last week. The exemptions unit in Queensland Health needs to be blown up. It is a national disgrace. The heartbreaking stories and lack of compassion and empathy that we are seeing daily from that particular unit, and the inconsistencies, that's the big thing. They're allowing these, footballers. If you can have a footballer's bubble with, 400 or 500 people in that bubble, how come you can't have a bubble for 2 or 3 people who want to come to Queensland to see their dying relatives or go to a wedding or go to a funeral? The inconsistencies being applied in this state is quite frankly un-Australian.
Indeed it is. And look, before I let you go, let's talk about the business impact as well, because Anastasia Palaszczuk makes the point that businesses are open, people are able to travel within Queensland, to go to restaurants. There are no limits on all of that. So those businesses are doing okay, but the numbers don't appear to back that up. I mean, the Gold Coast alone has lost $1 billion in revenue.
Laura, the problem with that argument is that, yes, you can get around Queensland, and Queenslanders do have their liberties, they do have their freedoms, and many will reward Anastasia Palaszczuk for that. But if you're a small business, or particularly a business that's reliant upon tourism, and as I said, you know, I'm in this studio, I'm about 3 kilometres from Surfers Paradise. You can shoot an AK-47 down there and you will not hit anyone because there is no one. And Griffith Street, Coolangatta, I mean, it is extraordinary. I mean, that is normally a thriving, bustling, you know, border street with many thousands of people there every day. And literally, it's a ghost town. So, you know, as I said, there is a big balancing act here. You know, and the mental health part of this is the thing that I think we are dismissing, you know, when we shouldn't be. The amount of people who are literally at their wits' end, whether it's because of frustrations of the inability to get here or because their businesses are closing. I spoke to a tourism operator only yesterday, Laura, and he told me that if the borders are closed at Christmas, final straw, he's going to get out of the tourism industry and go and start picking fruit.